Good morning, everybody. Hello. Welcome to our webinar. This is our webinar called New Features in Total Response 5.4. Thanks so much for joining us today. We've got a full house. So we're going to wait just a minute and let the last few trickle in. While we're waiting, go ahead and use the chat box to introduce yourselves by agency and where you're joining us from. We've got people coming in from West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Kansas, Sugar Land, Texas, South Dakota.
A lot of familiar names.
Absolutely. Going to give it just a couple more seconds as this attendance ticker climbs up. We see Florida, Tennessee. Welcome, Georgia. Just a few more seconds. Happy Thursday, everybody. Hello, Ohio and Illinois and Indiana. All right, folks, we'll kick this off. Welcome to our PowerPhone webinar, New Features in Total Response 5.4. My name is Danielle Morphy, and I'm the Marketing Manager for PowerPhone. Before we begin the presentation, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be made available after the presentation. To ensure the best possible audio experience, your mics have been muted. So if you have any questions, use the Questions tab on your webinar control panel. This tab is on the lower right control panel of your screen and is to the left of the chat tab. So look for the Questions tab if you have any, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. And also, for your best viewing experience, we recommend going into the full screen mode, which you can access from the center taskbar on your screen. You can ask questions anytime, and we'll answer them at the conclusion of the presentation. But now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to our host, our presenter, Greg Sheehan, Vice President of Product here at PowerPhone.
Thank you, Danielle. And thanks to everyone for taking the time to join us this morning. So today, we are going to take a look at Total Response version 5.4, which is our upcoming release. So what I'm showing you today is our final product that is in our final QA review right now. And the reason that we're doing this webinar is to give you a look at some of the new features that we have coming in this Total Response release. So when I look at this release, it is the thought is that you've asked us for things and we have listened and responded in this release. So we're going to look at some things in our new version that give you more control over the call script that's sent to your CAD, something that you've asked for a long time. Some enhancements to our Response Advisor feature, which will let your users know when they have dispatch recommendations that are pending in our system. New integrations with cloud services that put more information and resources at your fingertips. We also have a new improved print template that will help you generate backups of your protocols or allow you to print out a very simple version of the protocol so you could share it with other folks. Plus, a look at some font resizing in the call handler and our changes to the keyboard and mouse preference feature. So we're going to take a look at all of these in the software in just a few minutes. To start off with, I wanted to talk about some of the new integrations with cloud services that we have in Total Response 5.4. So part of listening and responding is this need for more resources and more information at your fingertips. We have 3 integrations that we're very excited to announce in this new version of Total Response 5.4. The first integration is with OpenStreetMap data. So OpenStreetMap is something you might be familiar with. It is an open source geographic data system that plots addresses on maps all over the world. We have integrated with OpenStreetMap, and you're going to see how you can enter in address data into Total Response and get latitude and longitude coordinates and addressing information for those locations right in our call handler. You also might be familiar with What3Words, which is an application that is gaining in popularity. So What3Words, it's a very interesting application. They've taken the entire planet and they've broken it up into 3-meter squares. Each 3-meter square gets a 3-word address. And when you're using their application on your cell phone, you could tell exactly where you are on Earth by reading that What3Words address. So we now have an integration where we accept What3Words addresses and can plot those locations on the map as well. And finally, the third integration we're very excited about is with the PulsePoint AED registry. PulsePoint is a nonprofit that you're probably familiar with, and their goal is to improve cardiac care in communities far and wide. What they do is they have an AED registry that anybody could contribute AEDs to, and then public safety responders in the area go and make sure that it is a valid working AED and verify the location. Once those are in the AED registry, it is publicly accessible to first responders, including the first responders who answer our 911 calls. So PulsePoint AED registry is another piece that we have integrated with in this version of Total Response. I'm going to show you how these new integration features work now. So bear with me while I share my screen. And give you a peek at our latest version of Total Response. So starting off, again, when we look at Total Response, those of you who've used the application before, it's probably fairly familiar to you. There are some things you might notice about it, which I will explain a little bit later. We'll see a new response advisor here that is somewhat larger than you might remember from previous versions. One of the things we heard was that the response advisor tended to get lost on the screen, particularly when it was placed in this area because the color was so similar. So we made some changes to make it stand out a little bit more, be more visible on the screen, and allow you to see it at a slightly larger size, which makes it maybe a little bit more readable for your users. So if we start looking at some of the features that we have, some of the new integration features, I'm just going to start a call in Total Response. So starting with OpenStreetMaps. OpenStreetMaps takes any type of address that you enter into the system and it plots it on a map. So we do a lookup into the OpenStreetMap data system and we can plot a latitude and longitude for any address that you enter. So I'm going to just enter in my home address for starters. And we do a type ahead lookup so that once we find an address in our system, like my home address, I can simply select it and it will show as a verified address in the system. You'll also notice that it's populated a latitude and longitude in my initial survey now. So OpenStreetMap will take that string of an address, translate it into something that is an X and Y coordinate on the map. Now, it also works with things like common place names as well. So if we search for something like Chino Valley Medical Center in Chino, California, we'll see that a common place name like that is also something we could find on OpenStreetMap. So we could enter in any type of a string of an address and OpenStreetMap will suggest a series of matches, look it up, and then again, plot the latitude and longitude for that address directly in Total Response. What3Words is also available as location technology. So as I mentioned, if you have a 3-word address that you enter, if a caller is providing you with a 3-word address that they have in the What3Words app on their phone, it can be entered into this What3Words field on our initial survey screen. So if I enter in this address of Holiday Insurer's Passport and I tab off of it, we go out to what 3 words and we do a lookup, and we can find the what 3 words URL that applies to that address. And we fill in as much address data as we possibly can to get a street address or location. And again, the latitude and longitude for that address all get automatically translated into our initial survey screen. So these services are optional services that you can use if you need to locate a caller that is unsure of where they are using these features in the total response software. Also, just again, I know that many agencies do get information data like this from their CAD. They get their location, their latitude and longitude from the CAD system. That is perfectly acceptable, and none of these services interfere with the data that's being transferred over from your CAD system. Now, when you have a latitude and longitude placed for the caller, and we have a location fixed for that caller, we can then leverage the PulsePoint AED registry. So I'm just going to bring up a CPR adult procedure to show how this works. The way we've designed the PulsePoint integration is that at certain points within a protocol or procedure, you can elect to look for AEDs at certain times. There's just certain times within a procedure or protocol where it's appropriate to look for an AED. And what we've designed PulsePoint to do with our integration with PulsePoint is to go out and fetch that information for you while you're continuing to do other work. So if I'm in the middle of going through a CPR adult procedure with a caller, and I've started to see if the patient is responsive, and I find out that that patient might not be responsive, I get to the question about AEDs being available. I now have the option, when I select an answer like unknown, of having PulsePoint go out and do a lookup of AEDs that are near the incident location for this call that I'm working on. So when I trigger off PulsePoint, it's very simple. It's just like triggering an answer in a script like you normally do. PulsePoint will go and search, and you'll see a little indicator saying that PulsePoint is doing a search for nearby AEDs. As I'm continuing to go through the procedure, PulsePoint is working in the background, and eventually it will return a series of results to me if there are AEDs in the area. Now, it appears in the bottom bar of total response. If you want to look at an expanded list, if you double click on that bar, we can open those up in a pop-up window for you so that you can see a list of AEDs that PulsePoint is returning to you. Now, for each AED that we have in the PulsePoint registry that gets returned to us, you get the name of the location where that AED is located. So we have one at St. Margaret Mary Catholic Church. There's also a description which gives more detail about exactly where that AED is located in the church. So in this case, we know that that AED will be located in the main church lobby on the left wall. This is something we could relay on to the caller to tell them where to go find that AED if they're looking for it. It's useful as well, even though if you have a lot of results in a very tight area here, there might be one location that the caller is more familiar with than another that's equally close by. You could send them wherever they're most familiar to retrieve an AED. If the caller's unsure where that location is, there are view map links as well. And when we click those links, that will open up a Google Map directions screen in the browser on your workstation. So again, if you have internet access on your workstation and you can leverage these features, you can get step-by-step directions from where the incident location is to where the AED is located. So if you need to guide a caller through those directions, you can tell them exactly where to go to get that AED. PulsePoint also gives you results not only for AEDs, but other tools or resources that may be part of the AED kit. So in addition to showing you that there's an AED here at St. Margaret Mary School, there is also a bleeding control kit included with this AED. Or in other kits, like the one at Chino High School, we have epinephrine available with the AED. So those results give you all the resources that might be available if you're looking for naloxone or epinephrine resource that you need in a certain situation. They might be in nearby AEDs, and Pulse Point will deliver that information to you. Once we've found the AED and then we've gotten it, we can always go back immediately and then move into our AED instructions procedure if that user has retrieved the AED, and then work through instructions with that user to actually put the device in operation. So those integrations, again, are part of this 5.4 release. Again, they're things that you can use if you have the ability to do so or would like to use those geolocation features or the Pulse Point AED locators in their registry. So looking again at some of the enhancements we have in our call handler in general, we talked very briefly about the response advisor enhancements. So we've made it larger and we've made it stand out more. We've also added a feature that brings alerts in the response advisor into better focus for users. So I'm just going to start up an abdominal pain protocol to demonstrate. So in the response advisor, and if you've used Total Response for any amount of time, as I start entering in information on a call, so if I have a patient who's 55 years old and is having abdominal pain, if I start entering in certain information, for example, if I say the user's or the caller, excuse me, is not alert and able to talk, eventually I will get a dispatch recommendation, and my response advisor will light up with a certain color. When it gets to the highest priority, sometimes there are still changes to the dispatch recommendation that occur as we learn more about the caller. So what we had heard from users was sometimes it was very hard to tell when the dispatch recommendation changed when you got to that highest level of priority. What we've added is an indicator that shows what the status of the dispatch recommendation is at any point in time. So right now, I know I have an updated dispatch recommendation that I need to do something with. So I can accept and acknowledge that dispatch recommendation. And when I accept it, you'll see that the green check mark appears and the word accepted appears next to it. So I always have a visual reference for what is going on with my dispatch recommendation at any point in time. Now, as conditions change, if I say that that person was not known to be breathing normally, I'll get the updated indicator again in the response advisor that lets me know it's changed. So even though the color hasn't changed, I have something else that's showing me that this needs attention. That's helpful too, because sometimes at the end of a call, when you're trying to end off a call or release it, you get that nice warning sign saying you must acknowledge the dispatch recommendation before you can release a call. So now with that indicator, we can always see exactly what the status is of our dispatch recommendation at any time to help make sure that users are always knowing what the status of the dispatch recommendation is and are not getting surprised by that. It also helps when we keep looking at that indicator to send data over to CAD in a more timely fashion. Okay. So another thing that has been asked for many years is a feature to remember whether you like keyboard or mouse navigation in our software. Now, I'll just reopen that same call for a moment. Keyboard navigation, as most of you have used Total Response know, works by when you're going through the questions and you select an answer, you press the tab key to move on to the next question. So when I press the tab key on mail, I can move over to the next set of questions, which is primary questions. We also have a mouse navigation mode where instead of using the tab key in the keyboard, if I like to click the mouse to move forward, I can now do that with one click of the mouse to move to the next question. For many years, users who preferred mouse mode had to go in every time they entered the software and set it to mouse mode. They had to set their preference because it always defaulted back to keyboard. In this latest version of Total Response that we've been developing, the system now remembers the last choice you made for navigation, and it remembers it for the next time that you come into the software. So if you like to use mouse navigation and you set it that way, The next time you log out of total response and you log back in, it will remember that preference and put you right back in that mode. So another time-saving thing that you asked for a lot of years, and we have now included in this release. Okay. By far, the thing we most often hear from our customers is that shortening the narrative entries that go into your CAD system from total response is something that is very deeply desired. Today, most of those entries from the narrative are going on to MDT screens where real estate is precious and the time to actually read and scan through those narratives is very precious for responders en route to the scene. So to try to make that better for you, we've added some narrative shortening features to our latest update to the system that I'm going to demonstrate to you now. So I'm going to bring up our CAD demo system to show this feature, which will show you how we can send abbreviated narratives or even block out whole questions and answers from our narrative if we desire. So I'm going to just connect this demo CAD system to my total response instance. And I'm going to start a new record in CAD. So this would be like you're building a record in your CAD system. I'm going to say there's a motor vehicle accident at 123 Main Street. And when I save that, that will launch a call in total response, somewhat familiar to you and the workflow that you use if you start in CAD and then you launch our software. So in total response currently, the view for the call handler does not change. We have a series of questions that we ask of the caller. So when we have a motor vehicle accident, we ask what has happened. Maybe it's a two-car accident that we're dealing with. And maybe there are 2 people injured in that accident. So as we start gathering information on the call and we get these questions asked, we have gathered our answers, and we accept the dispatch recommendation. If we look at our CAD system now, we're going to see something a little bit different in the narrative entries than we're used to. So previously, we were sending across these full questions, like what exactly has happened, how many people have been injured. We're now sending across an abbreviated narrative for those questions. So instead of something like what exactly has happened, we could send an abbreviated question like accident type, and then have the answer of vehicle versus vehicle. Instead of how many people have been injured, we could send a briefer question like injured parties. We could take any question and we could abbreviate the answers to those questions. I'm going to just send over this one about any safety hazards being on the scene with the words multi-selected there. So instead of seeing that big question, which can be confusing, we can just see a simple one-word question like hazards, and then see the answers of fuel leak and hazardous materials go into our CAD. The way we're doing this is we're allowing you, the control, to abbreviate your questions in our script builder module. So for any question that we have in a protocol, we have the full content which appears on the screen, which is useful to the call handler because it's a way to phrase questions for callers, things that you might read off to a caller, or it's driving the concept home to that call handler who's looking at the screen. We want to keep that full question in place, and then we could define a content abbreviation. Again, a shortened version of that question that can be placed in the CAD narrative instead of the full question. So this is where we would define our accident type question. That content abbreviation is fully under your control. You could define it to be whatever you want. And if you don't define one, the full question will still go over as normal. But as soon as we define a content abbreviation, that question will be the one sent to CAD instead of the full question. Also, there might be questions in your protocol that you don't want to go over to the CAD system as narrative. To allow you to do that, we're allowing you to suppress any question from being sent to the CAD narrative at any time. So For a question like this, has any person or vehicle involved in this incident left the scene? This question is designed to move you to the person or vehicle description procedures. And when you move to those procedures, you would enter in more information on a person or vehicle that might have left the scene in more detail. Since this question doesn't offer a lot of information, maybe you want to block it from the narrative in CAD and not send it. The choice is yours. There's now an exclude from script property, where if we set that to true on an element, it will not be sent to the CAD system. So you could control any question in this protocol from being sent to CAD or suppressed from being sent to CAD. This allows you with control to even not only shorten the questions in the narrative using those abbreviated content questions, but you can actually shorten your narrative further by filtering out questions that you don't want from being sent to CAD. The best news about this particular feature is it is designed to work with your existing interface to your CAD system. So we have changed our API to just substitute those shortened questions or simply eliminate questions from being sent to CAD. Your CAD vendor does not need to reprogram their interface or change anything. When you upgrade to this new version, it will work seamlessly with your existing interface in CAD. When we implement this new version at your site, our implementation managers can give you help with those features as well in terms of maybe figuring out what type of things you can suppress from narrative or how to best abbreviate your questions based on the CAD system that you're using. Okay. So looking at a couple of other features that we have in this release that we have also had many requests for. Just bring up this abdominal pain call one more time. Sorry about that. I had a little pop-up come in there. So one of the things we've heard from users is that the fonts sometimes on larger size monitors can be difficult to see. So if you're running at a very high screen resolution, some of the fonts on the questions don't scale up very well on the questions and answers. It can be harder for those of us who have maybe need some reading glasses every once in a while to see things on the screen. That's certainly me, to see these questions and answers. So we now have adjustable fonts in the call handler. So under the options menu, there's now a setting to adjust text size. We have our standard default text size, and we have a large and extra large option for our fonts. When I use the large option, you'll see that the questions and answers do get a bit larger. So this can just be a help if we need to see those questions and answers somewhat larger on the screen if you're having trouble with your eyes, or if the screen resolution makes those things appear very small for you. This can be an aid and assistance to kind of increase the size of those questions. We have that extra large option as well that you can use. That makes them much larger. So again, normally we recommend using the large version, but we have provided the extra large as another option if you're really having trouble struggling to read those questions. So we now have adjustable fonts in the call handler module, which has again been a long standing request from our users. Okay, a couple of more items to look at. Sometimes you need to print out copies of your protocols for backup purposes. Or sometimes you might need to share a copy of a protocol with a medical director, for example. In the previous version of Total Response, we had that 4-pane layout for printed protocols, and sometimes questions would get cut off, or if they did print out, they would be so small that it would be very hard to read them. We now have a new improved print template in this version of Total Response. So this new print template, there's a couple of pieces of good news about it. One of them is that it is now based on Open Office. So previously, you used to have a version of Microsoft Word available to view print templates. You will now be able to actually use it with the free Open Office suite that you can download. And when you generate and create those printed protocols, you don't need Microsoft Word on a computer to do so anymore. So if I just generate a copy of our breathing problems protocol, we've simplified it to be just a simple template that prints the protocol out in sequence, the questions and the answers from that protocol in one place, very neatly and legibly for you to use for backup purposes or to share it with others in your organization. So if I click my print button, I will print out that protocol. And once that finishes, I'll give a look at the new print format. Okay, so on my computer, because I'm a Microsoft user, it opened up in Microsoft Word. So we have full compatibility with Microsoft Word for those of you that still use it. But it will also work in an open office suite if you're using that as well. So the new print template just prints out all of the questions from your protocol in sequence in just a very simple printed sheet format. Instead of trying to fit it into some sort of a 4-quadrant print format right now, we've just kind of simplified and made it easier for you to generate backups of the protocols. All of your questioning and pre-arrival instructions for that protocol print up in one neat format so that you can share it with others or use it for backup purposes if necessary. Okay. Just a couple of other things to talk about that are new features in this software that are things that we've been asked for. Oftentimes, the time standard indicators that appear in total response are distracting to users. So those are those time standard indicators we see in the call handler, which had the times for validation of address, initiation of the call, dispatch recommendation, and call closure. Those time standard indicators, if you're not using them, can now be hidden from the call handler view. So I'm going to just release this call, close off my call handler, and I'll show you what that looks like with the time standard indicators hidden. Another feature that we have allowed you to take off of the call handler is the print checkbox in the response advisor. For some years, agencies actually needed to print out the dispatch recommendations if they were not using a CAD system and they needed some sort of a run sheet. That's very rare now, and most people, if they have that print checkbox on the screen, sometimes it gets checked by a user accidentally, and there are accidental printouts of run sheets that just aren't necessary when you're sending data to CAD. You can now hide that print checkbox in your response advisor if you want. So when we relaunch our call handler application, we'll see a new view which no longer includes those time standard indicators, and the print checkbox in the response advisor is now hidden, which can save some paper from all those accidental printouts that might happen. Finally, one of the things that happens for those of you who have to manage users in total response, as you use the system for years, it can get very cluttered with users who've come and gone from your system. So to try to clean up this view, we have an option to show users who've been deleted if you want to view them, but by default, that can be hidden on your screen so that you can only see the active users in total response. And as you start using the system for 5, 6, 7 years, you will find that there are a lot of inactive users that are just part of your system. So this gives you a much cleaner view now to see your users without looking through a list of people who maybe have left your agency for a long time. Okay, so that's an overview of the new features that we have in our upcoming Total Response 5.4 release. I'm going to bring it back here with Danielle to see if there are any questions that anybody has about the new release that I can answer.
Hey, hello. Thank you, Greg. I do see a couple of questions, so let's go through them. Okay, let's see. First question, we're going to back up to the integrations with what 3 words, pulse point, etc. Will you be providing the web address or port info for these new products so that we have the ability to open our firewall to these services?
Yes, we can provide all of that information to open that firewall to the services. The way that it actually works is you'll be making a call to a set of Azure Gov web services that we run at PowerPhone and have full control over. So our application calls on those services, which then in turn go call on things like Pulse Point and what 3 words. So we make it very transparent for you, and we have a very simple endpoint for you to open up to reach.
Great. We have 2 questions about the font sizes. Do the font size settings follow the user, or are they global to the workstation?
They follow the user. So they're individual to the user, and they can be adjusted by that user and will be remembered each time that user comes into the call handler application.
Another question about the font sizes. Will font sizes be changeable in the QA module too?
Unfortunately, not at this point. We are working on something for a release in 2023 where we are going to look to expand some of those adjustability options for font sizes across the application. So unfortunately, not in the QA module yet, but it is on our roadmap to implement very soon.
Fantastic. Here's a question about CPR instructions. Can we also print these instructions?
Absolutely. We do have an updated format as well for procedures, which is very similar to what you saw in the protocol format. So CPR instructions can be printed out just the same as a protocol. You will get all of your pre-arrival instructions in that same simple format for printing.
Fantastic. Another question, how soon will this update be available to us?
Yep. Again, as I mentioned, we are in the final stages of QA now. So early in 2023, we are going to actually be rolling this out and installing this on customer sites. So that will start probably sometime in January.
Fantastic. Let's give everyone a couple of seconds or a minute. If anyone has some questions they want to add to the questions tab, feel free to do that now. We'll give it just a few more seconds. All right. Okay. I think that we are at the end of this webinar. Thank you very much for giving us your time and attention. And as noted earlier, a recording of the webinar will be sent to you as well. So again, thank you and have a wonderful day and weekend. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.